All right, what's up, guys? Kevin Allen here, and I wanted to do a quick live stream today. This one's League of Legends based, just to show you guys how to set up the Domination Station Optimizer to take down a contest. And I thought it was kind of fun today because I took down the contest last night, motherfuckers, using the Domination Station, as always. And I got a bunch of questions today in our team community Slack forums, just really that showed some incredible lack of understanding how to use the tools. So I wanted to do this demo so that you guys get a pretty good sense of how to set this all up. I use a very, very consistent process every single time I attack League of Legends. There are differences between 2 game slates and 4 game slates and 6 game, which seems to be the largest, that definitely do come up. But their differences are not dramatic. It's just about ownership. So here is the screenshot of the win. So to be clear, we're doing a live stream after this slate was completed. Now, I'll just give you the kind of basics of where I got my exposures. The first thing I did was I went to our cheat sheet last night, and both Advantage and Chris in our DFS Army Slack were really high on BLG, uh, Billy Gaming. So there's a really well reasoned explanation for why here. I don't have to get into. Every one of you who is in our DFS Army Slack is aware of just being really high on this team. They were a slight underdog. So if you're using basically Billy Gaming, you could build whatever lineups you want. There was no restriction to salaries because the salaries on this team were fairly low. So that was a nice starting point for me. Now, let's jump over to the Domination Station Optimizer, and I'm going to show you real simple how I set this up. As a matter of fact, my settings are all still in place right now, so you could see exactly what I did. Now, let me see if these were the settings for. Yeah, the settings are all still in place right now, so you'll see exactly what I did. So the first thing I did, I made 70 lineups for the big contest. And if you're asking why 70, I don't like to max enter the $15 contest on a 2 game slate because a lot of times it's ties, and actually this tie wasn't as bad as it's been. I've seen much worse, but a lot of times you wind up in a bunch of ties, and so it actually doesn't pay back enough to really justify putting 150 into this big contest. I put the 150 in the dollar or the 50-cent mini max whenever I remember to reserve those entries early enough where it's still there. But for the 15s, I usually like to sort of lower that number a little bit, not go too crazy in terms of 150 because of the ties, especially on a 2 game slate. Now, when you first open up the Domination Station, here I used randomly select as well. So I used a couple of really important features here that I want you guys to see. When you first open up the Domination Station, I'm a little nervous to close it out and reopen it because, or reset settings. I'm not even sure. We might have deleted this slate. So I don't want to do that here. So I'm just going to show you what I wound up doing, right? So I set one unique player. It's two games. There is not enough space here to put multiple uniques in. You're going to skip over the winning lineup that way. So I leave it as one unique. This was not set to 50. I had that set at 0. I must have just scroller barred that, but I left randomization at 0. Now, I leave the prioritize completed items above max exposure buttons checked, although it's not necessary. I just leave that. What will happen with this check mark is if we set like crazy restrictions, max limits on players, then it will start to, and it can't make lineups. It will just ignore those max exposure limits. So here's the most important thing. Reading the spreadsheet, we liked Billy Gaming, and the Wii RNG game was basically a pick'em, and it looked to be a high-scoring pick'em game. So my approach was I want to get 70% exposure to Billy Gaming. I actually did 100% in the $4 or 90% in the $4, but in the 15 I wanted to go 70% exposure, so significantly higher exposure than the field was going to be on the slight underdog, and also leaving enough hedge here that if an easy LNG stack found its way into the winning lineup, I might hit that one as well. For the other game, I set it as a 50-50 mix. Now, you might be thinking like, how do you know which one to set the limit on? And I'm going to show you. So first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to set these both back to 100% so I can show you how we get it. Now, I use fantasy points in a win projection. That's what I always use. I'll make a little bit of modifications, but the reason I do that is because I'm now controlling team exposures completely. So I'm not leaving it up to the domination station. If you use mean DFSA projections or mean projections, meaning the mean that would happen if this slate played out 1,000 times, that's what a mean projection is. Or for those of you who don't understand that word, the average score that a player would get over the course of 1,000 or 10,000 matches between these two teams is the mean. Now, the mean projection or the average heavily accounts for win odd probability. This is something that works both for League of Legends and for MMA, sports where there is a winner and a loser, right? My assumption is that if I'm playing you in a tournament, if I'm playing this team or this player in a tournament, they will win. In other words, if they lose, it's irrelevant. I'm not going to win shit. So the only lineups that matter assume that both of the teams in the lineups win. Now, I got a question today within our DFS Army Slack. Hey, I played it and it only gave me the favorites. The heavy favorite. I didn't get any exposure to the other. Yes, with mean projections, it will always favor the favorite. That's how it works because the win odd probability is included. So I'm going to show you something here. When I run this raw, all right, so let me just continue through the basic functions here. This is randomly select teams. You don't have to do that. I don't always do it, so I'm going to turn it off. I did use it. I use it sometimes. It just depends on... Actually, we'll show the difference if we have time. We want to hang out for a little bit longer. I'll show you the difference. So I'm going to take that off here. Now, let's run 70 lineups. Again, I do not use the forced captain to the first stack function. It's here if you want to use it. I have not found that that is particularly predictive, but people ask. They want to force captain out of the 4-man stack. Again, I have not found that that's predictive enough that I want to use that restriction. I never use it. Okay, I just ran the tool raw. Look what happened. I got 95% Wii, 81% LNG, only 18% BLG, and 4% RNG. Now, what does this mean? Wii and LNG, the two heaviest favorites, when I use mean even fantasy points and a win projection in this case, were the highest exposures. But we know that we want about 50% of each of these two teams, and we want 70% Billy Gaming because everybody who is our people who actually pay attention to League of Legends, Advantage and Chris in our staff room, both were going crazy for Billy Gaming. So, I was like, that's why I played last night. I don't play every single day, but when I see that like sparkle in the eye of a coach, that gets me excited. So how do I get 70% exposure to Billy Gaming when I look down here and it gave me 81% LNG? Well, I simply limit LNG because we know it wants to use them at 81%. So if I limit them to 30%, all of the other lineups from this game will be pushed over to Billy Gaming. Right? Now we run it again. Now we should have 70-30 in the mix between Wii, BLG, and LNG. But now we get 100% Wii. Now, by the way, this wouldn't have been bad. Pretty sure we won and that would have smashed. But we said we want 50% of each of these teams. That's what I did last night. So I want to go right back to it. I said, this game's a pick'em. The winner's going to score well. I don't fucking know who's going to win. And that's the whole thing. I accept that I don't know who's going to win. And I don't want to blow all these lineups on, going all in on one side and it be wrong and you lose all your money. These esports League of Legends contests are winnable every day. So I don't ever want to kind of throw one away. So now I just set Wii to 50% max. Then I'm going to show you some other details that we can use that are really cool as well. But I just set Wii to 50% max, and now you will see this beautiful mix that we were looking for. Look at this. Look at it. It's beautiful. Gets me excited. 70, 50, 50, 30. That's what we wanted. You can control exposures exact. Now, what about stacks? All right. We could take a look and see. Look what I did here. We could take a look. Well, actually, let me take this off so you could see without me controlling it. So the next thing I do is I go over to this window here that says stacks. And what I'm trying to do here is just make sure that I get a pretty level mix of 3 and 4 player exposures across all of the teams. So I'm going to run it again right now. Oh, man. I wish I could remember what the hell I just did. But I'm going to run it again right now. And without the benefit of any sort of limits, you see here that, all right, it looks like we and BLG are getting the best. Now, we have more exposure to we, so that's fine. BLG, so I'm getting about 35 4-man, 35% in the 3-man. For we, I'm getting 30% and 18%. And for LNG, I'm getting 15%. So this looks actually like a pretty good mix. I might want to do something here where I maybe limit we to 25% here in the 4-man. But actually, this looks pretty good. We can actually control it, though. There are times when I'll run this and I'll see one team just exploding and the 4-person and just not an even mix. So I use the max exposure limits to control some of that and bring it back down to even. Now, here's the final step. This shows team combinations, right? So here it says BLG, RNG, 40% BLG, we, 30% LNG, we, and then LNG, RNG. So the one that I think is a little too high here is BLG, RNG. I kind of want to level out BLG, RNG with BLG, we. So let's see if we can do it by setting a limit to BLG, RNG pairings. Nope, doesn't work. So we don't want to do that. Sometimes you got to just run it sometime and be like, all right, there's a reason mathematically why it wants to pair those two up. So we're going to leave that. Oh, I totally forgot. One of the most important things that I do with the settings every time, and this is really critical, at the captain position, take a look at this. It's already done, so you're going to get to see it. The captain position, when I click on team, there's nothing. Why? Because I've eliminated the team position from captain. When I click on support, look, nothing, right? They're all excluded. I did that because I don't like a support as my captain. So I eliminated them, right? Let's go to top. What do we got? Just a couple of them. And the only reason I allowed these two to be available for the top position was because they had been really good scorers. So, they actually score really well. Like these are tops. Normally I eliminate all of the tops from eligibility from captain. I don't find it's ideal, but sometimes when there's two massive favorites, you have to use tops or supports that you want to use. But those slates are almost better off not playing. Like those slates, if it's just 2-game, it's not so good. But generally, I try to eliminate the tops and the supports now from eligibility, and I just leave my junglers and ADCs and whatever. Now, even with junglers, what I do is I'll limit my captain exposure to them. I don't want a ton of them. I like ADCs and mids as my captains if I can squeeze them in there. And when you do this, it also kind of forces the combinations to be a little bit more favorite underdog, which is what we want. That's usually what's going to win. So that is how I set up the Domination Station every single time. Now, here's a little add-on feature that I really like. Randomly select teams. Now, what's the danger? I use randomly select. I just kind of look at what my combinations look like. So let's give it a run using randomly select teams, and let's see what changes. Because I did use random, I believe, to generate these. So first thing I'm looking at the team exposure is still the same. So even using randomly select, because we have 50% we, it's always going to be 50-50, and 30% LNG, essentially we're still going to get the same mix of teams that we wanted. Okay? The stacks, pretty similar. Combinations, pretty similar. So we're not getting any real difference here. You do see a difference. It's making no difference in the run, and that's just the nature of just having two games. Even if it's randomly selecting the teams, the combinations that it's making are the only ones that can be made, again, on a 2-game slate with these limitations in place. So this is your basics. Now, if this was a slate, and just to get higher level DFS strategy component in here as I'm about to sign off, if this was a slate, even if the teams, like one team was heavily favored, like minus 300 or minus 350, and the other, with in 2-game slates with League of Legends, it's so random and upsets are so frequent that I still think you borderline just go 50-50 on all of the teams. Now again, unless there's some edge, like on a this slate, this slate with the edge of everybody in our staff screaming about Billy Gaming, BLG, which did end up winning. On this slate, I went higher than the normal 50-50 mix, but even in slates where there's a minus 600, like I still want about 30% of that underdog. I want more than the implied probability of them winning, because if that underdog does win, your chances of binking a contest, taking down first place, and not having a bunch of ties is so much higher that just winning one of those, to its implied probability would be enough to make up for sort of losing on 30% of entries when it doesn't work, if that makes sense. So for game theory purposes, like last night, the night before last, I think it was FPX, whatever the team was, it was a minus 800 favorite. They lost. And I think Dominus won, DMO. And no one played Dominus because they were like a plus 600 underdog. And so they were only 8 or 9% owned. If you had, and it was a 2-game slate. So if you go into a 2-game slate and one of the teams is only going to be 8 or 9% owned, and sure, their implied win probability is probably only 8 or 9 or 10% in that slate, it doesn't matter, because it's not just about their implied win. You don't get a 50-50. If they win and you have 25-30% and you hit those nuts when no one else does, you're going to take down a tournament. That could be a 50K solo win versus today's win for me, which was 50K to first, only 3,500, because it wasn't a plus 400 underdog. It was a plus 120. Like, it was barely an underdog. So that's the difference between a big win and small. And you could see here, as you look at the 50-50 mix, I mean, you could pretty much see the both the LNG lineups back here, and the probably these were RNG, whichever team of, I think, we and RNG. I think RNG was the loser. So that's what this is. Some some of the LNG, some RNG over here, and then all of these are probably BLG with the team that won. That's, even having that pairing doesn't automatically get you in the money in a 2-game slate. All right, guys. Hope this helped. Any questions? I'm always here. I always want to show you guys how to use the tools. It was EDG. Okay, there you go. Yeah, that's how much I know. I don't fucking remember even the term DMO. Yeah, I don't fucking know. All I know is I look at the sheet, who's got the advantage. Wait, EDG. Oh, that must have been from the other night. Yeah, that must have been from the other. I'm like, what? Yeah, that was the loss from the other night. I look at the sheet. I look at this stuff, and I do account for who we think is going to win. Absolutely. I'll usually go a little higher on that team. But again, with this week, with the adamant sort of reasoning behind it, like I read this one, and it's kind of like, see, when you read the RNG section, Advantage kind of says, well, I'm not really sure. I haven't been right a lot on we. He basically is qualifying it as he thinks it's a 50-50 matchup. Chris in Slack chat said the same thing. Kind of think this one's a 50-50. So I just ran it 50-50. This one, everybody was very sort of confident in Billy gaming. So Billy gaming. So for that reason, I was like, all right, let me go higher exposure to this underdog than I normally would. So I jacked it up to 70. And like I said, in the $4 20 entry, I did it to 90%. That's where you want to take an even bigger stand. So the more lineups I'm making, the less I want to go crazy with taking a big stand. When I'm making only 20 lineups, I do want to take a very heavy stand. And again, I don't want to hear anybody ever say, the optimizer gave me. The optimizer doesn't give you anything. What happens is you tell the optimizer what to do. If you let the optimizer give you something, all it's going to do is push for the favorites. So, okay, that's fine and it could work. But if you want to bring any sort of strategy to the table, you have to really work it at least a little bit. So, hopefully, this helps. I use this process every single day. And actually, like I said, if you guys all were like zombie robots, ignoring odds and just, doing this approach, it would work out better. I mean, take your mental sort of preconceived biases out of the equation and understand even that with underdogs, yes, their chances of winning are slightly lower than a favorite, but those slightly lower probabilities are well more than made up for by the fact that they're lower owned and your profit margins when you hit on an underdog are so much bigger that it's worth kind of emphasizing them rather than de-emphasizing them. I hope that makes sense. All right, guys. Good luck. Let's keep playing it. Let's keep it going. Keep taking down these tournaments. Good stuff. Any questions? Hit me up in Slack, dfsarmy.com. Like and subscribe to this channel on YouTube if you like to learn about DFS, not from fucking frauds, but from people who really play and from our site where our members win. That's the difference between DFS Army and everywhere else. Their staff wins, our members win. Let's do this.